Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. We spend so much of our emotional energy trying to explain, to fix, to make the other person see our worth, especially when the person we care about has pulled away. But here's the truth: closure doesn't come from convincing someone to stay. Closure comes from deciding that you deserve peace, even if they never apologize, never explain, never come back. When you deal with someone avoidant, the kind of person who shuts down when things get real, who ghosts instead of communicating, who seems allergic to emotional intimacy, your instinct might be to chase them, to send that long message, to remind them how much you cared, to hope that your words will make them realize what they lost. But that never works, because the avoidant isn't moved by pressure, they're moved by presence. And the most magnetic kind of presence is silence. Silence doesn't mean bitterness, it means grace. It means walking away without drama, without accusation, without one last plea. It's when you reclaim your energy and redirect it toward your healing, your goals, your peace. It's when you stop trying to prove your value and start embodying it. And that's the kind of shift that an avoidant can feel, even when you're not speaking, because suddenly you've stepped out of the dynamic where they hold the power. You're no longer waiting for their attention, you've given it back to yourself. That's when something interesting happens. The avoidant starts to feel your absence, not because you punished them, but because you've changed the script. Your silence becomes the mirror that forces them to face what they ran from, the reality that they lost someone calm, loving, and grounded enough to hold space for them. And no matter how distant they are, that realization stings. It makes them question their choices. It makes them wonder, did I misjudge this person? Did I lose someone who actually cared? But here's the key. This isn't about making them beg for another chance. It's about reclaiming your dignity so completely that if they do come back, it's no longer to fill your emptiness. It's to meet you on equal ground. When you stop chasing, you start choosing. You become the person who doesn't need validation because your peace speaks louder than any explanation ever could. So the next time you're tempted to send that one last message, pause. Let your silence speak for you. Because the most beautiful closure you can ever create is the kind that doesn't require words. Silence is often misunderstood. People tend to see it as retreat, as if saying nothing means you've lost the argument or accepted defeat. But in truth, silence can be one of the most powerful tools of emotional self-mastery. It's the moment when you stop trying to control how others see you and instead focus on how you see yourself. When someone has hurt you, rejected you, or pulled away, the instinct is to defend, to justify, to make them understand your heart. You want them to see your intentions, your goodness, the love you are offering. But when you reach that place where you realize that explaining yourself is no longer necessary, that your worth isn't up for debate, that's when silence becomes your greatest statement. There's a quiet dignity in choosing not to respond, not because you don't care, but because you care too much about your peace to keep arguing for it. It takes courage to walk away from a situation that leaves you unseen, and even more courage to do it gracefully. Silence doesn't mean you're cold or detached. It means you've matured enough to know that chaos doesn't deserve your energy. When you refuse to chase or plead, you are telling the world, and yourself, that your self-respect matters more than validation. It's not about playing games or withholding emotion. It's about recognizing that your voice carries more weight when used sparingly, when it's not spent trying to prove something to someone who isn't listening. The avoidant personality often thrives on control and emotional distance. They retreat when intimacy feels too close, and they subconsciously test whether you'll chase. The more you pursue, the more they withdraw. It's an exhausting cycle that leaves you drained, constantly trying to win back what shouldn't need winning. Silence breaks that cycle. When you stop responding to their avoidance with desperation and instead respond with composure, you shift the power dynamic entirely. You stop being the one seeking approval and become the one who chooses peace. That shift is magnetic. It creates an energy that says, I am okay with or without you. And that energy commands respect. Silence also allows space for clarity. When you remove yourself from the noise, from the constant push and pull of emotions, you start to see the situation for what it really is. You begin to hear your own voice again, the one that was drowned out by anxiety and overthinking. You start to understand that your worth was never dependent on someone's ability to recognize it. In that stillness, you heal, you gain perspective, you rebuild your strength not by fighting harder for someone to stay, but by standing firmly in your truth, even if it means standing alone. And the beauty of silence is that it echoes louder than words ever could. The avoidant, who once dismissed your emotions, begins to notice the absence of your energy. The quiet hits differently because it's not angry or dramatic. It's calm, resolved, final. It communicates everything you wanted to say, but in a way that demands reflection instead of reaction. That's when silence transforms from emptiness into power, the kind of power that comes from knowing who you are, what you deserve, and refusing to accept less. When you care deeply for someone who keeps pulling away, your first instinct is often to close the distance. You reach out, you text, you try to explain, hoping that if they just understood your heart, they'd stop running. But this is exactly what drives an avoidant personality further into retreat. Avoidants don't respond to emotional persuasion, they respond to space. They don't hear words when they feel overwhelmed, they only notice energy when it's withdrawn. The harder you chase, the more suffocated they feel, and the more they convince themselves that distance equals safety. That's why the real shift happens not when you chase, but when you stop. The moment you stop trying to prove your love, and instead focus on protecting your peace, everything changes. When you step back and stop pouring energy into convincing someone to stay, you interrupt the dynamic that keeps you powerless. The avoidant is used to being pursued. They often rely on that chase to confirm their worth without ever having to risk emotional vulnerability. But when you withdraw your attention, when you no longer fight for their affection, something within them begins to stir. It's not just curiosity, it's discomfort. Suddenly, the predictable pattern is broken. They expected you to fight for them, to send another message, to show that no matter how far they run, you'll always be there waiting. But now you're quiet. You're not arguing. You're not pleading. You've removed your energy from their emotional supply, and that silence unsettles them. Avoidants are not heartless, they are fearful. They fear intimacy because it makes them feel vulnerable, but they also crave connection at their core. Your chasing once allowed them to have both. They could feel wanted without feeling trapped. Your silence, however, forces them to face what they've been avoiding, their own emotions. When you no longer reach out, they begin to experience the absence of your presence. The void left behind isn't filled by someone else or by distraction, because the emotional safety you offer doesn't come easily. They start to question their choices. They wonder where you went, why you stopped trying, and whether they misjudged your strength. That's the paradox. The moment you stop trying to win them over is the moment they start to feel your value. By withdrawing, you reclaim control of the emotional rhythm. Instead of reacting to their distance, you define your own. Your silence becomes the pause that resets the entire connection. It gives you time to reflect on what you truly deserve and gives them time to feel what life is like without your constant reassurance. And in that space, something profound happens. They start to realize what they've lost, not because you told them, but because they can feel it. That's the language they understand. It's not the words, not the explanations, but the quiet absence of energy that used to revolve around them. It's through that silence that they finally begin to see your worth. Because sometimes the most powerful statement you can make isn't, "Please come back." It's the unspoken message your silence carries, "I've stopped waiting." Peace is a kind of closure that no one else can give you. It's not found in long conversations, in last messages, or in perfectly worded explanations. It's found in that quiet moment when you stop needing answers from the person who hurt you and start finding comfort within yourself. When you've been in a relationship with someone avoidant, your mind naturally gets stuck in loops, wondering what went wrong, replaying every conversation, searching for clues to understand their distance. You think if you could just have one honest talk, if they could just admit what happened, you'd finally feel better. But that's the trap, believing that closure depends on them. Real closure doesn't come from another person's words. It comes from deciding that your peace matters more than your confusion. When someone walks away or withdraws emotionally, they take more than just their presence. They take the future you imagined with them. That's why you chase closure. It feels like the only way to make sense of the pain. But here's the truth: people who are emotionally avoidant rarely give you that kind of ending. They leave things open, vague, unfinished. They disappear, or they say something like, "I just need space," and then vanish into silence. You wait thinking they'll come back with clarity, but they never do. And every day that you keep waiting for that explanation, you keep yourself stuck in the same loop. The real breakthrough comes when you stop asking, "Why did they do this?" and start asking, "Why am I still giving this pain power over me?" That's where peace begins, not in answers, but in acceptance. Choosing peace means accepting that some people will never give you closure because they can't even face themselves. Their silence isn't a reflection of your worth, it's a reflection of their fear. When you stop needing them to validate what you already know, that you showed up with love, that you cared deeply, that you gave your best, you take back the power you once gave away. You stop being a prisoner of what ifs and maybes. Instead, you begin to honor your own emotions without waiting for permission to heal. That's what real closure is: the quiet decision to let go of needing anything from the person who hurt you. There's something deeply liberating about that kind of peace. It doesn't happen all at once. It comes in small moments. It's when you go a whole day without checking your phone for their message. It's when you stop replaying the same argument in your head. It's when you can think about them without your heart sinking. That's how you know you're healing, when you stop waiting for their version of the story and start living yours. Because the truth is, closure from another person is temporary. They could say all the right things and you'd still wonder if they meant it. But peace, real internal peace, lasts. It's not dependent on anyone else. It's the quiet strength that grows inside you once you finally decide, "I don't need to understand everything to move on. I just need to trust that letting go was the kindest thing I could do for myself." When you stop chasing and fall into silence, something powerful happens. The avoidant finally feels the space they created. For so long, they've lived in a pattern of running when things get real, believing that distance protects them from pain. But what they don't realize is that their avoidance doesn't just shield them from discomfort, it also isolates them from genuine connection. When you decide not to react, not to chase, not to fill the silence with explanations or apologies, you force them to face the consequence of their own behavior. Your absence becomes the mirror they can't look away from. It reflects the truth of what they've lost: someone steady, patient, and emotionally grounded enough to care even when they pulled away. Avoidant people often run because they assume they'll be chased. They believe that no matter how much they withdraw, someone will still try to reach them. But when that expectation breaks, when you no longer respond to their silence with pleading words or desperate attempts to reconnect, they're left with a void. That void is your absence. It's the missing warmth of your messages, the missing comfort of your understanding, the missing energy that once centered around them. They may not admit it out loud, but that absence speaks to them louder than any confrontation ever could. Suddenly, the emotional distance they once wanted feels cold, and the silence they once preferred begins to sting. Your silence, however, is not about punishing them. It's about holding up a boundary with grace. It says, "I will not fight to be seen." It says, "I'm done explaining my worth to someone who can't recognize it." That calm withdrawal is powerful because it's not rooted in anger or manipulation. It's rooted in self-respect. It removes the emotional safety net they had in you. The avoidant often expects chaos when they distance themselves. They expect drama, confrontation, or guilt. But when you meet their avoidance with peace, you disarm their defenses completely. They can't label you as needy or demanding anymore because your actions don't fit their narrative. Instead, they're left alone with their own discomfort, forced to confront what they've done. And that confrontation is uncomfortable. The silence you create doesn't just highlight your absence, it reveals the depth of the connection they took for granted. It forces them to replay the moments when you were patient, when you stayed, when you listened, and to realize how rare that was. In time, that awareness begins to build regret. It makes them question if they misjudged you, if they confused peace for passivity, if they mistook love for dependency. The silence becomes their teacher, delivering the lesson that words never could. Your silence also becomes your healing space. While they are processing what they've lost, you are rebuilding what you almost gave away: your peace, your power, your presence. The difference is that you are growing while they are realizing. That's the beauty of silence. It creates space for truth to surface, both for you and for them. It doesn't scream for attention. It simply allows time to reveal who values what truly matters. And in that revelation, the avoidant is finally faced with what they tried to avoid all along: the pain of losing someone who loved them without asking for anything but honesty. Reclaiming your power is not about revenge or proving a point. It's about remembering who you were before you started doubting yourself in the relationship. When you've been entangled with someone avoidant, it's easy to lose sight of your worth. You start to shape your behavior around their comfort, walking on eggshells so they don't pull away. You find yourself trying to say the right things, to be easygoing, to not come off as too much. Slowly, without realizing it, you shrink yourself just to hold their attention. Reclaiming your power means reversing that process. It means expanding again, breathing again, choosing yourself instead of waiting to be chosen. It's about shifting from "how can I make them stay" to "how can I take care of myself now that they're gone?" When you shift your focus back to yourself, everything changes. The avoidant suddenly loses the upper hand. They're used to you orbiting around them, waiting for replies, overanalyzing their actions, constantly trying to interpret their silence. But when you decide to stop giving that energy away, when you choose peace over anxiety, you flip the dynamic completely. You're no longer the one reacting to their withdrawal. You're the one setting the pace. That's what real power looks like: quiet, confident, and self-contained. It's not about making them miss you. It's about realizing that your energy was the valuable thing all along. Once you take that energy back, they feel the absence. Not because you're punishing them, but because your calm detachment removes the emotional safety they relied on. In relationships, energy speaks louder than words. When you're in your power, you stop trying to prove your worth and simply embody it. You move differently. You stop checking your phone obsessively. You start sleeping better. You engage more deeply with your friends, your passions, your goals. The glow of someone who has reclaimed their peace is magnetic. It's the kind of confidence that doesn't shout, it just radiates. And ironically, that's when the avoidant begins to take notice, not because you begged for attention, but because your silence and composure make them question their assumptions. They thought you'd always be there. They thought they could come and go without consequence. But your absence, paired with your calm strength, tells a different story. You're not waiting anymore. Reclaiming your power also changes what you attract. You start to see relationships differently, not as spaces where you have to earn love, but as partnerships where love flows naturally. You begin to understand that connection should feel safe, not stressful, that love should build you up, not leave you guessing. You no longer settle for breadcrumbs because you've remembered that you are the whole meal. And if the avoidant comes back, and often they do, you meet them differently. You don't need them to fill a void, because there is no void left to fill. You can choose whether to open the door or not, and that choice comes from strength, not longing. That's the ultimate transformation, when your peace becomes non-negotiable. You no longer trade your emotional stability for someone's inconsistent affection. You stand tall in your worth, not because someone else reminded you of it, but because you finally remembered it yourself. And once you do, you realize that the real power was never about making them beg for another chance. It was about knowing you'd be perfectly fine even if they never did. In the end, the most powerful kind of closure isn't about winning someone back. It's about winning yourself back. It's about understanding that silence, peace, and self-respect speak louder than any explanation ever could. When you stop chasing, you stop losing yourself, and that's when your true strength begins to shine. So if your heart ever aches for answers, remember the way you choose yourself is the answer. Thank you all for listening, for showing up with open hearts, and for reminding me that growth begins the moment we decide our peace is worth more than our pain.